Welcome to the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast. If you're the lucky person responsible for keeping your business profitable into the future, you need to be a learning organization. So here at the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast, we talk about managing organizational knowledge to keep your business strong. I'm your co-host, Nathan Eckel, and today we are very lucky and privileged to have the amazing Peggy Salvatore with us. Peggy, how you doing?
Boy, after an intro like that, I couldn't be doing any better. How about you, Nathan?
It's going well. So I am just really happy to be able to dive into the topic that we have today. Actually, it's a very, very important topic because it's near and dear to the heart of every good CEO. It is the topic of succession planning.
Succession planning is huge today as we see people peeling off into the sunset to retire, and you see a new generation of people coming up. A lot of them are very different than the people who are leaving. So we are looking at what are they stepping into, and are they really prepared to step into it? And it goes much beyond leadership training, wouldn't you say?
Oh, it's all kinds of things that happen. But, succession is something that I learned. I had led a very similar organization as you had in a different area, as you know, Peggy. And it's like the day that you end your journey from becoming a board member, then becoming maybe a president-elect or a president, and that day that you become a past president, that's when this succession piece really comes into play. And if you're good, like I know that you were, and I had made a pretty significant effort to do this as well. Part of succession planning, a big part of it is getting people in the key roles. But the piece that I learned about is when I realized I had to actually get out of the way for what was going on. Now that's not what we're going to talk about today necessarily, but it's a funny little story that hopefully you can't relate to at all.
Okay, so we're going to talk about our succession planning story. First of all, succession planning is usually considered an HR issue. It's about finding the right person and grooming a person for a position, usually president, CEO, etc. So succession planning doesn't really talk about the information that you need to run the organization. It really has to do with the qualities of a leader. And my perspective, and as you said, we've both run an organization as president. We've stepped down. We've seen what happens behind us. And we know that you can never have enough prep around that person. So what we have is chapter 1 of the book starts out with a joke. Can I read the joke to you, Nathan?
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's the joke. A new CEO took over a troubled company. He asked his predecessor how to handle certain crises if those crises should arise. The retiring CEO said, "Don't worry about it. I put 3 envelopes in the top drawer of your desk. They contain everything you need to know." So after the new CEO took over, things appeared to be going pretty smoothly for a few months. Then he encountered his first crisis when his poor first quarter was reported. Unable to get adequate answers from anybody on his team about critical issues, he remembered the 3 envelopes. So he opened up his desk drawer and he saw that they were numbered. Number 1, number 2, and number 3. He opened up number 1 and it read, "Blame your predecessor." The advice was brilliant in its simplicity. He approached the board of directors and explained that his predecessor just left a disaster behind. And the board appeared pretty satisfied with that explanation. Crisis averted. About 6 months later, things have been going on pretty uneventfully, but then another larger and more public crisis loomed. Again, the new CEO remembered the envelopes, returned to the desk, and opened up the drawer, pulled out envelope number 2 and read it. It said, "Blame the economy." So he held a press conference flanked by bar graphs and explained the global economy was to blame for his company's failures. Worked like a charm. Business continued to lurch along for about another 6 months until bigger problems started crashing down around his ears. He couldn't find solutions, and his management team was unable to provide critical information. He visited the desk drawer one last time, opened up envelope number 3 and read it, and it said, "Get 3 envelopes."
So that's not what we're talking about here, correct?
That's not what we're talking. We're talking about how to avoid this.
So what are a couple of things that we can do to just avoid having to use the envelope method here, Peggy?
An organization is just that. It's a living, breathing organism. Almost the same root word, right? And it's a living, breathing organism, and it has to do with all of the pieces and components of that, all of the people involved. So everybody's intelligence, everybody's contribution makes that organism work or not work. But everybody needs to be involved, and there has to be a free exchange of information among people, which is why all the successful organizations these days are known as learning organizations. So when you bring somebody in at the top, in a sense, HR has it right. You're looking for leadership qualities. But the other thing is the leader needs to be leading something and needs to know what it is they're leading, and they need the information in order to make good decisions. A great leader is charismatic, holds the vision, is able to get out in front of the parade and show people what the goal looks like, but they also need enough information to make good decisions. So, and that's very important. So a strong learning organization has all that information available so that when the leader says, I need to know X, Y, and Z so I can decide which way to point this caravan, that information exists.
So, Peggy, this sounds like I can just hear people thinking as they're driving or doing whatever they're doing as they're listening to us right now. They're thinking, man, that's a real rosy, perfect world that you live in, Peggy and Nathan. So we know that this is an ideal, that we know that this is where we know this is where a learning culture has to be, a business culture has to be. Well, we got to talk about that messy middle or even the messy beginning. What are just a couple of common sense things, really simple steps? They might not be easy, but for that CEO or that CLO or that executive officer with an O in their title, what can they do to at least start turning the cruise ship around so that it can face in the right direction?
Well, that's, it's a big piece of the work that we're doing here is to teach organizations how to do a thorough assessment of what all their valuable, critical, can't lose it, irreplaceable information is internally. When you do a really thorough assessment of that, then you have a pretty good idea not only where you're going, but you have a pretty good idea of where you stand. And you can't direct the ship and decide where you're going unless you know where you are right now. So really, it's very important to be able to do an assessment like that. And you're right, it's relatively simple in the approach, but it isn't an easy task. It is something that takes a little bit of effort and time, but it's well worth it, because what's the alternative? The alternative is you've got an organization, you're not quite sure where that organization stands. How are you going to get where you need to go?
I'm thinking about that very famous quote, and the name is slipping me right now, but he said the first job of a leader is to define reality.
Wow, that's great. I can't say I've heard that, but it's fabulous. And it's so interesting for us to be having this discussion about leaders and having the information you need and setting the vision, because we're getting a new president of our country tomorrow. So, there's somebody with, whether you like his vision or not, he articulates it. Everybody knows what he stands for, and everybody knows where he's taken the ship. Some people love it, some people hate it, but everybody knows what it is. Yeah. So that's, and that's true of any leader, but you need the detail. You need the detail.
So if we know where we are and at least have a baseline of understanding, another thing that people can do is get some kind of an assessment done so that they have a scoreboard or a dashboard, or they understand what are the right metrics to measure and what does reality look like for you right now. And I guess maybe a third thing is just the guts to be able to communicate it in such a way that you're not gilding the lily and sugarcoating anything.
And that's why people bring in a consultant, because so many times they do know what's going on. It's pretty darn obvious to a lot of people in the know what's going on in an organization, but very few people can spend the political capital to say what's going on in the organization. So it's a great time to bring in outside voice or an outside set of eyes to see it from a new perspective and be able to present it in a way that the people internally can perhaps accept it maybe a little more easily.
Great. Well, hey, this has been a very brief but a nice skimming discussion that goes below the surface a little bit, as much as we could in about 10 minutes here. Hey, everybody, I want to encourage you to listen to the next podcast episode, where we're going to be talking about the missing component in knowledge transfer and how not to miss it wherever you are. So this has been the Working with Subject Matter Experts podcast. We'll see you on the next one.